Hey guys, this is AI Gaming 1776 and we are looking at Shadow of Mordor with the GTX 960. This is a 4GB 960 made by EVGA. This is the For the Win card. Now let's start looking in the upper right hand corner at Msi Afterburner. We are at 70 degrees Celsius for the temperature. We are at 1405 for the operating speed. And we are using all 4 gigs of the VRAM. We're at 54 frames per second. And system RAM, we're using 6600 megabytes of system RAM. So let's go into the options and look at the graphics. What I've done is the Ultra preset without motion blur. Everything else is the Ultra preset. I went to the Ultra preset and then I got rid of the camera blur. So we're playing pretty much Ultra settings unless you want to split hairs over the motion blur. And the game looks pretty good, in case you're curious. Now, you might be wondering, real quick, let's go look in these options again. You might be wondering, hey, wait a minute, this card doesn't have 6 gigabytes of VRAM, so what's going on with the textures? And that's a great question. We picked the Ultra texture quality anyway, and we're using all 4 gigabytes of the VRAM, but it looks to my eye like not everything is an Ultra texture, but it looks like a lot of stuff is. So it seems to be trying to load the Ultra textures. How well it's succeeding, I don't know, but it is trying. I can tell you that much. And I will show you, we'll play the game a little bit, and I will show you when I change that to high, we're only going to use about 2.5 gigs of VRAM. Versus right now we're using all 4. So whatever is going on, it's using 1.5 gigs of VRAM extra when I change the settings from Ultra to high. Just try to look into the camera to see how this looks. It looks pretty good. Alright, it's a little bit bright. The brightness setting is a little high on my end, but in the camcorder it looks fine. So we are above 60 frames per second. We're at 62, 63. This is a BenQ XL24. Really? These guys are really stupid. This is a BenQ XL2430T monitor. It is a 144 Hertz monitor. So I'm using a camcorder instead of game capture software, because all my game capture options that I have right now, they all record at 60 frames per second. I think even Shadow Play. I think it's called Shadow Play. The GeForce thing that works with the NVIDIA cards, I think it's called Shadow Play, and I think that on my computer anyway, here we go. I've seen settings, well, options that say I can record at 60 frames per second. So what I do when a game can do more than 60 frames per second is I've been using the camcorder, and I know that's not ideal. Now the other problem, well, there's a whole host of problems, that probably more than I want to get into right now. I've discussed it in other videos. Really? I did not want to execute him. I was trying to do it to the guy that was standing. Like I've got a whole strategy for it. Anyway, long story short, we are using a camcorder, even though this only barely goes above 60 frames per second on Ultra, but I have a feeling when I turn things down, we're going to see a higher frame rate. So as you can see, the camera swings around flawlessly. There's no screen tearing. There's no stutter. It's playing very smoothly, very well. The game looks fantastic. Plays responsibly. Looks good. So this card does really well at this game. Now that shouldn't be too big of a surprise because I have a 4 gigabyte GTX 745, which is basically the graphics card that comes with a lot of pre-built computers, and that graphics card can actually play this game at 30 frames per second pretty well. So it's not super surprising that this is playing so well on a 960, but for what it's worth, Shadow of Mordor, some people consider it to be a demanding game, and we have everything pretty much maxed out, again minus motion blur. And we are kicking it at 55 to 62 frames per second. Just went down to 54. There we go. So my strategy is I decapitate a person that's standing. I don't even know if that's a good strategy, but usually while I'm doing that, whoever's laying down, they get back up, and that helps me keep the chain going, because sometimes if you have everybody just laying down, your chain breaks. Whoa, that actually is pretty funny, because I was going to reset the game anyway, so that's pretty good timing. I was going to switch over to the high textures, because I'm going to show you that we were using all 4 gigabytes of VRAM, but then when we go down to high textures, we do not use all 4 gigabytes of VRAM. Now I'll show you the rain real quick since that loaded up. Now I personally think the way that I choose here, can I make, what brightness are we on? Oh, brightness is pretty low. There we go. Not sure if that's any better or not, because the camera might just adjust for that. So anyway, the settings I choose I think actually look better than ultra settings. But I don't know if I'm going to go into my personal settings for this video. I've actually made a video showing my personal settings before, so I don't know if I really need to drag this out. So let's do advanced options. So what we're going to do is, all we're going to do is change texture to high. Everything else stays the same. Now you saw, we're going to have to get out of the game real quick. You saw that we were getting basically 54 to 62 frames per second, and we were using all 4 gigs of VRAM. So we wait a second, and then we start the game back up. And now we will see how much VRAM we use. Now, part of the reason I'm doing this is I'm doing a review of the GTX 960, and the 960 is sort of by default a 2 gigabyte VRAM card, but there are board partners who make, well, yeah, anyway, there are board partners who make a 4 gigabyte card. I just remembered there's no actual reference card made by NVIDIA for this, the 960, so they're technically all board partner cards, if we're, you know, going to be technical here. Alright, so continue the story mode. We're only using 2 gigabytes of VRAM right now, actually more than 2, 2300, 2400, 25, it is climbing. Now I've done this before, and I know I only used about 2.5 gigabytes of VRAM. I know that much. Okay, so with that in mind, the 2 gigabyte card might even, I don't know if I'd say the 2 gigabyte card would have trouble loading the high texture, but we're using 2.7 gigs of VRAM. Now we're back down to 2.5. But this is more than 2 gigs. Okay, so again, that's why I'm showing this. Let's see, where's that guy at? Up in the tower. That's why I'm showing this, because they do make a 2 gigabyte version of this card. This is the 4 gigabyte. I actually have the 2 gigabyte card, and I'll test it. The problem is, and it's funny that I'm going to call this a problem, the GTX 960 is a good card for 1080p. It is so good that even if you choose Ultra and it's only a 2 gigabyte card, it'll let you do it. And the game will actually play pretty well. It won't be a big deal. We're only getting 56 frames per second, so 64, went up to 64. So, but we're using 2.8 gigs of VRAM right now. We were using 2.5. We're at 2.8. So it's still less than the 4 gigs. Now we're at 3 gigs, but it's still less than the 4 gigs. So just keeping that in mind. Now, again, this game says you need a 6 gigabyte card, which is basically a 980 Ti. Let's just put that in our pipe and smoke it for a second. So this game says you need a 6 gigabyte card for the ultra textures. Well, now we're at 2.8 gigs again. And remember, we were using all 4 gigs. I'm really bad with the bow in this game. We were using all 4 gigs when I had the textures on Ultra. Now I put the textures on high, we're using 2.8. So as you can see, game still plays well. It played well before, so why wouldn't it now? Alright, just for giggles, let's change the settings. Let's do shadow on medium. and actually mesh. Do I want high? I forget. Mesh might actually be on high. I haven't done this in a while. Ambient Occlusion. Oh, let's see. Depth of field. Actually, I think I might have had all of them. Let's just turn all those off and see what happens. Let's just see. The question is, are we going to get a higher frame rate? That's all I want to know. So we turn those settings down. Quit the desktop. Wait a couple seconds. All right, so the question is, will we get a higher frame rate? We might not. It'll be interesting to see. Now, when you're climbing in this game, a lot of what I've been doing in this game has been on the ground. When you're climbing, a lot of times you actually will get 70, 80 frames per second, even on Ultra, because a lot of games are going to give you a higher frame rate when the camera is focusing on things higher up off the ground, because they're basically having to render a skybox or whatever. They're not having to do all the stuff on the ground, the people walking around. Look, we're at 78 frames per second. 80. Okay, so now that kind of justifies using the camcorder. Because, 62 frames per second, that wasn't super impressive. All right, is there a difference? Yeah, there is a difference. I'm not going to lie. It does. Well, okay, so here's the deal. Does it look as good as it did just a minute ago? Yes and no. The world looked a little bit richer before, okay? But here's the thing. It's a brown world. Everything in this world is brown. There's a couple sprouts of green here and there. So if you want a higher frame rate, we're still on high textures. We're still on high texture filtering. It still looks good. It doesn't look bad. And while I'm smoking on this guy, he's getting 87 frames while I'm getting 87 frames per second. Let's run down here. Get into a battle. I'm not even saying that I recommend these particular settings. I'm just showing you how to get a higher frame rate basically at this point. So yes, we can have a higher frame rate. The textures are on high. It doesn't look bad. I would have to play with it to dial it in, because the way that I normally set it up, the rocks would look a little richer right now. The rocks are more of a matte finish instead of shiny. All right, see, we're about to lose our combo because we have no one to kill. Which goes back to what I was saying earlier, is, all right, how do I do this? Yeah. Okay, so let's get you. All right, run, 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 run. Run. All right. I don't like how you have to hit the right bumper from up high. Oh crap. And then there's a mini game too. This is only the second time I've actually jumped on one of those things. All right. So how's it look on the camcorder? I'm looking through the viewfinder. Kind of looks how it does on my screen. Everything is less shiny now. It was more shiny when all those settings were turned on. So I'd have to dial it in. I'm not going to lie, I do like my games to look shiny. But 73 frames per second, super tight gameplay. It looks good, it doesn't look bad. It's just not shiny anymore. It's not as rich or shiny. But yeah, so you've seen it maxed out. You've seen, oh, we're using 2.4 gigs of VRAM, which is interesting. All right, why is that interesting? Well, we were using 2.8 before I just turned some settings down. And now we're still using 2.4. So this game is pretty heavy on the VRAM. But I think most people know that. Anyway, if you have the 2GB GTX 960, it plays the game. I'll have to test it again. I haven't done a back-to-back test yet. I'm pretty sure the game plays. It's just going to be an issue of how's it going to look, because we're already using this much VRAM. Now, the thing is, with some modern games, they use more VRAM than they need. So, for sake of argument, if you had a 12 gigabyte GTX Titan, sometimes a game will use more VRAM just because it's available. Sometimes. I don't know, I have to double check. So I'll have to test with the 2 gig, but this is how it's playing with the 4 gig. Now just so you guys know, I'm doing a review of the GTX 960. I've got 4 cards. I have 2 of the 2 gigabyte cards. I have 2 of the 4 gigabyte cards. And that's one of the reasons why I'm posting these videos, because when I do the review of the card, I'm going to in my review say, hey, this is how it performed in these games, and then I'm going to link to these videos so I can show you guys how did it perform in these games. And as you can see, it performs pretty well. It's not earth-shattering. I mean, it's only 1080p gameplay. It's here, I'm going to pause it because I'm not trying to do all this fighting right now. I mean, it's only 1080p gameplay. It's not maxed out now. Even when it was maxed out, though, it was still getting around 60 frames per second, but not really sure if it was really loading the full the full ultra textures. I mean, they call for 6 gigabytes, and I don't have a 6 gigabyte card, so I can't even tell you if it looks different. Because again, I would need an AMD card that's got a lot of VRAM, or I would need an 8 gigabyte 980 Ti. Just to even, I said 8 gigabyte, 6 gigabyte 980 Ti. Anyway, hopefully this video has been helpful to you guys. If you're curious how the game runs on the 4 gigabyte 960, this gives you an idea. 71 degrees for the temperature, 1405 for the operating speed, 2.483 for the VRAM right now, 4.7 for the system RAM right now, and 75 frames per second in the pause screen. But even if we play the game 72 frames per second, 80 when this guy's going to talk, 71 frames, 68, 67, and there you go. Anyway, AI Gaming 1776, and y'all have an excellent day.